So I recently joined a new gym, and it's kind of a bougie, fancy, expensive gym. But I got a really good deal and it's close to my work and they have a pool. So I was like, hell yeah. And it's been a minute since I had a gym membership, at least one this bougie, because before the pandemic I would just go to the rec center. And a lot of the time there I would see other fat people in the pool. And I was so excited about it that I almost forgot that going to the gym is a fucking minefield when you're fat. And I should say, like, I'm a small fat person. Like, I'm like a size 16, 18, and last time I went to the gym, I was a couple sizes smaller, and it was still a minefield. Body standards at the gym are like body standards in the entertainment industry. You can be a regular average-sized person on the street, but at the gym you're fat. I didn't really remember, like, how much you have to slog through when you're a fat person working out in public. Thankfully, no one has said anything to me yet, but I have gotten some funny looks, especially in the pool. And when you're fat at the gym, like, the standards for you are so much higher than anyone else, right? Like, in normal life, you're supposed to be a good fatty who goes to the gym and eats healthy. But at the gym, like, you don't want to sweat too much, you don't want to grunt, you don't want to look like you're working too hard, but you also don't want to look like you're going easy. Because in either situation, people will judge you. And mistakes like, this is embarrassing. The other day I swam backwards into somebody because I was swimming on my back and I didn't realize, like, how we were dividing the lane. Or, like, if you forget to wipe a machine down or something. I feel like that stuff is just, like, 40 times more humiliating for a fat person. Because you're validating that stereotype of, like, fat people are dirty and gross and clumsy and unaware and blah, blah, blah. And, like, people who go to the gym demographically are probably more likely to be fatphobic. So I'm hyper aware of that constantly when I'm there. And it's sad because it brings me joy. Like, I love to lift weights and I love to swim, even though the towels don't fit me. So it's hard because, like, this place that could be such a positive place for me, like, I have to slog through so much, both in my own mind and, like, in people's reactions to me in order to be able to enjoy it at all. Because the toll that it takes on you, like, even in just everyday life, knowing what people must be thinking of you, partially based on their reactions to you, partially just on your knowledge of being a person who lives in the world, like, that toll should not be underestimated. And at the gym, it's 40 times worse. And you know what's so sad is that I just start to feel guilty, like, for inflicting my body upon people. When, like, I pay for my membership the same as they do.
When this woman first started talking about fat phobia in the gym, I thought she was going to say she experienced someone putting her down because of her size or something like that. But all she said was she's gotten some strange looks and feels self-conscious. And I'm not exactly sure what these looks are, and I'm not saying people being fatphobic at gyms never happens, but if you're very self-conscious, as this woman clearly is, and someone looks at you at the gym, you could very well be interpreting that look as judgment when it's probably just a harmless glance. Case in point, when I started going to the gym, I thought everyone was looking at me all the time because I didn't know what I was doing. But after going to the gym for a while, I realized that nobody is paying attention to me, and I'm not really paying attention to anyone else. My point is that this entire video seems like a strong projection of stereotypes she believes about the world. She thinks all people believe that fat people are lazy and slothful and shouldn't be at the gym, and she also said people that go to the gym are more likely to be fatphobic. These are all just stereotypes that you've internalized. The idea that people that go to the gym are more fatphobic than the general population isn't true, because, as I said, most people aren't paying attention to anyone else at the gym except themselves. And they're often very kind people. In the words of Elle Woods, exercise gives you endorphins, endorphins make you happy, happy people don't shoot their husbands. This woman needs to get out of her own head, work on being less self-conscious, and stop seeing fat people and gym people as caricatures instead of just normal people living their lives.
So here's the thing. Weight loss is not always the result of improvement, and it's not always an improvement in itself. Sometimes people lose weight for reasons that are not improvements, like cancer or an eating disorder or grief or depression. So I think it's really important to address before I answer the rest of this question that weight loss and improvement are not the same thing. If you made some positive behavioral changes and you lost weight from it, I think it's okay to talk about the behavioral changes. However, if you want to be considerate, do keep in mind who you're speaking about that in front of. Because sometimes when people tell me those things, it feels a little bit like they're preaching, or even trying to recruit me or fix me. So even if you don't intend it like that, just know that it can come off that way, and keep that in mind if you decide to talk about it in front of a fat friend or family member. Another really nice thing to do would be to ask the person permission. Would it be okay if we talked about my weight loss? Can I tell you about my weight loss journey? Something like that. This might sound extreme, but I've literally had to walk away from conversations about weight loss or body size because it's triggering for me. So especially if the person you're talking to is fatter than you, or you know they have a history of disordered eating, asking permission is a really good thing to do. Also, consider that maybe you just don't need to talk about it. I personally think that someone's weight or diet is the least interesting thing about them, and that kind of talk is boring as fuck.
This woman is really trying to sound reasonable in this video, but if you actually listen to her, she's pretty selfish the whole time. The commenter asked why they're not allowed to see their weight loss as an improvement, and she responded with saying that some weight loss is due to grief or disease, so it isn't an improvement. But this commenter wasn't talking about weight loss in general. They were talking about their own personal weight loss that they saw as an improvement, so all that extra information she gave was irrelevant. She then goes on to say that you have to be aware of talking about your weight loss specifically in front of fat people. Here's the thing. If you want to say that weight loss can be triggering for some people, sure, that's true. But you have to be aware that that is for everyone, not just fat people. But the reason this woman specifically said fat people is because she feels like when people talk about weight loss around her, they are making an indirect comment about her size, which isn't true. That's why she feels uncomfortable with people talking about weight loss in front of her, and why it makes her feel like a failure. And she extends that line of thinking to all fat people, but not all fat people are as self-conscious as you are. Also, telling someone that maybe you shouldn't talk about your diet and weight loss to anyone because I personally find it boring is an incredibly selfish thing to say.
Straight people do not need pride. They're welcome to come and support and educate themselves.
I want to elaborate on the fantastic point this video makes. This creator is basically saying that in the way that straight people support LGBTQ people, thin people should support fat people instead of co-opting the movement and making it about them. I also want to add to that I think that the way that fat phobia shows up in a lot of people who aren't fat is kind of similar to the way that homophobia shows up in a lot of straight people. And that is that they are afraid to be queer, afraid to be fat. And they think that since their homophobia doesn't extend to anyone but themselves, it doesn't affect anyone but themselves. But that's not true, because when you talk about how either you are afraid to be gay, you wouldn't want to be gay, you dismiss something because it's gay, that is the same as talking about how you're afraid to be fat, wouldn't want to be fat, etc., or are scared you're fat. And that affects the queer or fat people who are hearing you say it.
What's the matter? Just hay fever.
If you didn't read the text in that video, it says, when one of your only fat celeb role models got skinny and you can't express your feelings about losing one of the few good representations there were without being accused of not supporting their new healthy lifestyle and denying them bodily autonomy. I showed these two videos together to show how weird it is that the fat acceptance movement gets away with comparing being fat to being gay, even though they know body size is something that is changeable. Like, being gay is not a mutable trait, but they are aware that someone's body size can change and at least outwardly claim that they're fine with that. They say people can do whatever they want with their bodies and we're not policing them. So why are you idolizing someone for their body size to this degree when you know body size isn't static? Fat activists like to compare fat phobia to ableism, but let's take depression, for example. If someone called me ableist for saying, I don't want to develop depression, I would rightfully call them stupid. Because ableism is discrimination against people for being depressed, not for simply not wanting to be depressed. And that is just as ridiculous as saying not wanting to be fat is fatphobic. Fat activists compare fat phobia to ableism when it's convenient for them, and homophobia when it's convenient for them, but conspicuously ignore how inconsistent they are with these comparisons. If I say I don't think it's reasonable to make the world accommodate people that are 500 pounds in public spaces, then they'll say that I'm being ableist. But if I say I don't want to be fat, then they'll say that's like not wanting to be gay, implying that being fat is some sort of immutable trait. You need to pick one, at least. Is fat phobia a fear of being fat like homophobia, Or is it discrimination and lack of accommodation for being fat, like ableism? Because it doesn't make sense if it's both.
My hot take of the day is that the reason why people love intermittent fasting so much is that they get to stay in their binge restrict cycle, but this time they're not making themselves feel wrong for it because the binge restrict cycle is the diet.
This hot take is stupid. She's basically saying that intermittent fasting is, in and of itself, an eating disorder that causes you to binge and restrict, which implies that everyone who intermittent fasts has an eating disorder, which is obviously wrong. She also put this comment on the video. If you do intermittent fasting and you're offended because it works for you and is mentally healthy for you, then this isn't about you. But if you're that upset at the suggestion that it could be disordered, maybe do some soul searching. That is such an absurdly condescending thing to say. She said intermittent fasting is an eating disorder, and when people were like, whoa, wait, I don't have an eating disorder, that's not true and a kind of messed up thing to say, she responds with, oh, I didn't mean you. But if you were offended by me saying that, then I might have been right. I don't do intermittent fasting, and I'm offended by that. Maybe don't spread misinformation, and people won't be offended.
So something that I think is super common in our culture, and particularly in the sort of person who will pursue like intermittent fasting, is that we all think we are out of control with food. And if we don't fix our eating, structure our eating, we will never stop. For most people, this is not true. Or if it is, it's coming from some like underlying psychological coping mechanism, something's going on. But rather than investigate the root of that, we instead focus on cutting out food groups, cutting carbs, like intermittent fasting, whatever it may be, to like gain some control over it. But really that's never going to be as effective if you feel like you have a problem with food than actually like looking inside of yourself and possibly ending that restriction so that your body can like regulate a little. I think because food is so demonized in our culture, a lot of us think that we have a problem with food when we may actually not, or when our problem with food may be stemming from the restriction that we are like imposing on ourselves. So I just had a huge conversation with my therapist this morning where I was talking about how I've been made to feel like I shouldn't be hungry. And the one time where I felt like I was like eating correctly, I thought it was because I was intuitive eating, but it was actually because I was broke and my body stopped craving food because I had starved it. And I thought I was doing it right because I did not think that I should want food or I should need to eat very much. But that's not true. We literally need food, a lot of food. We are people who need fuel. And I feel like underlying a lot of these conversations about diets or your relationship with food, like there is often this idea of like, well, I shouldn't need it. Like this shouldn't be a big thing for me. And I am in this right now. Like I'm going to therapy about it. That's how in it I am. So just know, like, if you feel like you must have a problem with food because you like feel like you eat too much, you may not even be eating too much. If you are, it's not because something is wrong with you. It's probably just because of how you've been treating your body, what your mindset is, what like underlying psychological stuff is going on for you. Anyway, diets like intermittent fasting or like something temporary like Whole30 or like keto where you're restricting one food group but the other thing doesn't have a calorie limit, like those can feel like they might give you freedom, and I fell prey to all of them back in my day. But what I found since stopping is that true freedom is not going to be accessible when, one, you are pathologizing your own relationship to food, and two, when you are like physically restricting yourself. I'm going to tag some dietitians and people that you should follow who talk about like intuitive eating and food freedom down below.
This video screams projection. The entire thing, top to bottom, projection. I said in my I Weigh podcast episode that people who have struggled with food restriction often project their own food issues onto everyone else. They starve themselves for XYZ reason and with these restrictive food rules, and therefore it's bad for anyone to restrict food in any way. And this woman is talking about going to therapy and learning about her own bad relationship with food, and then goes on an app like this and is like, my therapist told me that this applies to anyone with a bad relationship with food. The reason people go to therapy is to get specialized help for their own life and their own issues. It's why you're told not to cope with advice from the internet, because it's not specific and everyone's situation is different. And yet, this woman went to therapy and is now telling everyone that my therapist told me this based on my experience, and you should take this advice to heart. But honey, that wasn't my therapy session. Stop projecting your issues with food onto everyone else. At least 3 times in this video, she says things like, don't restrict, restriction is bad, look inside yourself and try to fix that urge to restrict. Just listen to her.
So, like, if you feel like you must have a problem with food because you, like, feel like you eat too much, you may not even be eating too much. If you are, it's not because something is wrong with you. It's probably just because of how you've been treating your body, what your mindset is, what, like, underlying psychological stuff is going on for you. We all think we are out of control with food. And if we don't fix our eating, structure our eating, we will never stop. But really, that's never going to be as effective if you feel like you have a problem with food than actually, like, looking inside of yourself and possibly ending that restriction.
All of those things sound like things her therapist said to her. Things that she should be saying to herself. And yet, she's giving advice to everyone else on the internet. Deal with your own problems and stop trying to project your issues onto everyone else.
So, 3 weeks ago, I turned 25 and I had a panic for obvious reasons, but also some not so obvious reasons. I started to think about it and I realized that since I was a kid, I've been told I seem older than I am, I'm mature, I was taller than all the other kids, and then I got fatter than all the other kids. And of course, I got cast as older characters in my youth theater shows. And for that reason, I started to feel like the experiences of being young were denied to me. I've said it as a joke and seriously many times that fatness stole my youth. And now being 25 and watching my youth rapidly disappear before me, which is maybe dramatic for someone who's only 25, but still, 25-year-olds are parents, 30-year-olds are parents. I'll be 30 in 5 years, and I've been playing a parent since I was fucking 11. Basically, I'm just feeling time running out even more strongly, and I'm realizing that I'll never get to be young and thin and conventionally attractive. And even though I have spent years working on that and processing that and being okay with it, like, it just hit me again because of turning 25. And this is all to say that ageism is intimately connected to fat phobia. And the overlap there is desirability. I've already been thinking, oh my god, I'm already fat, now I'm gonna have to be old too? Because that's just one more thing counting against me as far as desirability. And I really don't want to base my value on desirability in the eyes of society or men or whatever. But it's so hard not to do that when every message you get reinforces it. So of course I freaked out about turning 25. I'm scared also of my body changing even more. I'm scared of gaining weight as I get older. I've just finally learned to exist in this body, and then I'm gonna have to take on all the things that come with existing in a body larger than mine as I age. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things and to challenge them. And to cast fat people when they are young as people their own age. Cause that shit will fuck with you.
Dramatic. So dramatic. I know she said she was being dramatic, but this was a lot. She's acting like 25 years old is, like, decrepit. And that sharp turn she took in the middle to talk about ageism gave me whiplash. What does you feeling unattractive have to do with ageism? Yes, as women get older, they're seen as less attractive, but you said you already felt unattractive your whole life, so what are you saying? And it's very telling that when she compares fat phobia to ageism, she only connects it with the beauty aspect, even though there's a lot more to ageism than just that. The body positivity movement is always trying to say that they're about more than just beauty standards and it's about systemic oppression, but it all seems to come back to beauty standards in the end. She also said that she was cast as someone older in all of her childhood plays, which somehow ties into ageism, even though I think the term for that is actually adultification, not ageism, and these experiences help steal her youth, which honestly is very confusing and I don't have the bandwidth to unpack here. What it seems like this woman is really saying in this video isn't that fat phobia and ageism are linked. She's trying to rationalize this statement she said.
And I'm realizing that I'll never get to be young and thin and conventionally attractive.
I'll never get the opportunity to be young, thin, and conventionally attractive. Ouch. She's already spent 25 years of her life feeling ugly, and she's worried the next 50 years will be the same. But that's not ageism. That's insecurity. That's a self-esteem problem. And it's not society's problem to fix.
Podcast episode, so subscribe to More Than Tracy Turnblad if you want to hear that in the coming weeks. But for now, I will say, There is a really common narrative that links fatness and depression. A lot of times that is because of emotional eating. But the truth is that is not how depression manifests for everyone. And in fact, a lot of people are at their most depressed and in their worst mental state when they are their thinnest. It's not the only reason, but a lot of times this is because of disordered eating. So a lot of times weight gain can actually be correlated with an increase in happiness. Whether that is because someone was too depressed to eat and is no longer that depressed, or because they're recovering from an eating disorder. But in self-help circles, a lot of the time you see fatness linked to unhealthy mental states. And the idea is if you could just conquer your unhealthy mental state, you would no longer be fat. Deeply untrue and deeply harmful. Because the fact is, fat phobia hurts our mental health.
Fat activists will say that dieting isn't good for mental health, but when someone tries to deal with their mental health alongside trying to lose weight, then that's deeply stigmatizing and wrong. So, are your mental health and physical health related or not? Or only in situations that are convenient for your narrative? And this is a whole chicken and the egg situation. Are people depressed because they're fat, or are they fat because they're depressed? And the fact is that both of these situations probably exist. And there are studies that show that depressed people are more likely to be overweight than non-depressed people. But the purpose of this video was to essentially take a more nuanced look at the idea that depression leads to fatness. But earlier she said that intermittent fasting is an eating disorder. So when someone says that depression and fatness are linked, she's like, no, we need more nuance than that, or else it could be stigmatizing to fat people. But when she says that intermittent fasting is an eating disorder with no nuance given, and people are like, actually that's not true and there's a lot more complexity than that, she's like, if you're offended by what I said, maybe you should do some self-reflection. Sounds like a whole lot of hypocrisy to me.